What happens when you start a journey without rushing, without a clear destination, and without knowing how far it will take you? Hi everyone, hope you're having a great day. Today we're going to explore the very first steps of James and Diep's slow journey across Vietnam, a journey that doesn't begin with distance, but with learning how to move, how to pause, and how to truly be present. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next episodes of their journey. The morning arrives quietly. There is no sharp alarm, no rush, no sudden sense of excitement. James wakes up a little earlier than usual and stays still for a moment, staring at the soft light slipping through the curtains. His mind isn't racing through plans or destinations. There's only one clear thought resting there. Today, they are leaving. Diep wakes up not long after. She sits up slowly and looks around the room, letting her eyes linger on familiar corners. It doesn't feel like goodbye, but it isn't just another morning either. It's something in between. A calm pause before movement. She catches James's eye, and they share a quiet look without saying anything. They pack in silence. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that feels agreed upon. A few clothes, basic necessities, a small notebook, an old camera. When the suitcases finally zip shut, it looks lighter than expected. There's space left inside. Diep notices it, hesitates for a second, then leaves it as it is. Somehow it feels right. James steps outside first to check the car. His movements are familiar, practiced, but slower than usual. Diep follows, taking one last breath of the morning air before getting in. When the door closes behind them, nothing dramatic happens. No long pause, no final glance back. Just a simple moment that quietly marks the beginning. The car starts moving. The road is familiar, one James has driven countless times before. Yet today, it feels different. He doesn't turn on the music. He lets the sound of the engine, the wind, and the distant noises of the morning fill the space instead. Diep leans her head lightly against the window, watching the scenery slide by. They don't talk much, and somehow, that feels perfect. The silence isn't empty. It's full of awareness. Diep notices the sky slowly brightening, the houses becoming fewer, the trees growing thicker along the road. She feels her breathing slow down, matching the rhythm of the drive. James keeps the speed steady and unhurried, not because he has to, but because he wants to. He realizes that if they rush, this trip will turn into another task, another goal to complete. Going slow feels like a choice, a different way of moving forward. They stop when hunger gently reminds them it's time. Not at a planned spot, just a small roadside place with a few plastic tables and chairs. The food is simple, familiar, nothing special. But sitting there, watching people come and go, Diep feels something shift inside her. It feels like they've stepped slightly outside of their usual life. James eats quietly, his attention drifting around the place. An elderly man sitting near the entrance, a child riding past on a worn bicycle. Small, ordinary moments. He thinks that maybe this journey won't be defined by famous landmarks, but by scenes like these, brief, unnoticed by most, but deeply human. Back on the road, the scenery begins to change more clearly. The space opens up, the houses thin out, the land stretches wider. Diep senses the transition not just outside the window but within herself. She stops thinking about where they're going and lets herself exist inside the movement. James feels his shoulders relax without realizing when it happened. His hands stay steady on the wheel, but his mind grows lighter. He thinks about the routines they've lived with for so long, the schedules, the responsibilities. This trip already feels like an answer, even if the question was never fully spoken. The afternoon arrives gently. The sunlight softens. The road curves more often now, winding through higher ground. Diep starts to feel tired, but it's a good kind of tired. The kind that comes from being present. She adjusts her seat slightly, saying nothing. James notices and eases off the accelerator just a little. There are long stretches where the road feels almost empty, just mountains, trees and sky. Diep watches it all pass by, feeling both close to home and strangely far away at the same time. She thinks about how starting this journey by travelling through their own country feels grounding, like preparing the heart before asking it to stretch further. James feels the weight of the day settle in as the light begins to fade. He doesn't resist it. The tiredness feels earned, balanced. He knows they'll stop soon, even before either of them says it out loud. As evening approaches, they decide it's enough for the first day. There's no need to push further, no reason to chase distance. They find a simple place to rest. Nothing fancy, just quiet and clean. James carries the suitcase inside. Diep opens the window, letting the cool air drift in. They sit on the bed for a few moments. No the rushing to speak, Diep feels a clear sense of relief. The first day is over, nothing went wrong, nothing extraordinary happened either, and somehow that makes everything feel more solid. James spreads the map out on the small table. He looks at it, then at Diep. Neither of them reaches for it. The map feels less like a plan and more like a suggestion. After a moment, James folds it up and sets it aside. Today isn't about tomorrow yet. Today is about having started. Night falls quickly. Outside, the quiet deepens. Insects hum softly in the darkness. Diep lies back, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the day, about how leaving didn't require a dramatic reason, about how moving forward can feel gentle instead of forceful. She wonders if travelling slowly, one place at a time, might lead them further than they ever expected. James turns off the light. In the darkness, he feels Diep's presence beside him. They don't need to talk. He knows she's thinking something close to what he is. The first day ends like this, calm, unhurried and steady. Just enough to show them that this journey will be different from any they've taken before. The night feels deeper than usual, not darker, just quieter. The kind of quiet that settles into the room slowly, as if it knows no one is in a hurry anymore. James lies awake longer than he expects, listening to the unfamiliar sounds outside. Insects, distant wind, the occasional passing vehicle far away. None of it feels intrusive. It feels like the background of a story that has just begun. Diep turns slightly beside him. Her breathing is slow and even now, but her mind is still awake. She isn't thinking about the next destination or the length of the journey. Her thoughts drift instead to the idea of movement itself. How strange it is that for so long, movement meant pressure, progress, purpose. And now, movement simply means being somewhere else tomorrow. At some point, sleep arrives without announcement. Morning comes gently again, as if the world is cooperating with their pace. The light entering the room is softer than the day before, filtered by clouds and trees. James wakes first, feeling a stiffness in his shoulders and a quiet satisfaction in his chest. It's the feeling of having rested properly, not just physically, but mentally. Diep wakes soon after. She sits up and stretches, then smiles faintly, surprised by how calm she feels. There's no rush to get ready, no list waiting to be checked. Just another day of the journey, and that feels more than enough. They move through the morning slowly, washing up, changing clothes, stepping outside to breathe in the cool air. The place they stayed is quiet, still half asleep. A few doors closed, a few lights just turning on. James notices how different mornings feel when there's nowhere specific to be at a certain hour. They eat a simple breakfast nearby, nothing planned, nothing special. Coffee tastes better than usual, or maybe it's the way they're drinking it, without distraction, without glancing at the time. Diep watches the steam rise from her cup and thinks about how rarely she allows herself to just sit without needing to go somewhere. James checks the car again out of habit. Everything's fine. Of course it is. Still, the small ritual grounds him. He leans against the door for a moment, looking down the road ahead. He doesn't feel excited in the way people usually talk about travel. What he feels is steadiness. and that feels more honest. They get back on the road mid-morning. No early start, no late one. Just when it feels right. The road continues to wind gently, climbing and dipping, revealing new layers of landscape. Diep notices how the light changes as they move, how shadows stretch differently across the hills. She realises she stopped thinking of this as a trip and started feeling it as a rhythm. James drives mostly in silence again. When he does speak, it's about small things. Something he noticed outside, a memory triggered by a familiar smell. Diep responds easily, without needing to fill the space. Their conversations feel lighter, less structured, like they're no longer trying to arrive at conclusions. As the hours pass, fatigue returns, but slowly, naturally. Not the kind that demands a break, but the kind that suggests awareness. Diep feels it in her legs when they stop briefly to stretch. James feels it in his hands when he loosens his grip on the steering wheel. Neither of them complains. The tiredness feels earned, almost welcome. They stop again, not because they plan to, but because something catches Diep's attention. A small road branching off. Nothing marked, nothing famous, just a different direction. James follows her gaze and slows down instinctively. They exchange a look, one that says everything without words. He turns the wheel. The road narrows, the scenery changes subtly. Fewer signs, more space. They don't know exactly where it leads, and neither of them checks. For the first time, James realises they've stopped trying to control the journey entirely, and surprisingly, that doesn't scare him. They don't stay long, just enough to walk a little, breathe differently, feel the ground under their feet. Diep feels something loosen inside her, a tension she didn't realise she'd been carrying. She thinks about how much of life is spent moving toward things without ever truly choosing the direction. Back in the car, the afternoon drifts on. The sky shifts again, clouds moving slowly, light softening. James becomes aware of how much he's enjoying this ordinary day. No big moment, no highlight, just motion, presence, and shared silence. As evening approaches for the second time, something changes subtly between them. Not dramatically, but clearly. They're no longer in the act of starting. They're simply travelling now. The beginning has already passed. They decide not to push further. The instinct to stop comes easily, without debate. Another simple place to rest. Another quiet evening. When they arrive, Diep notices how natural it feels to unpack just a few things. Not settling in, not passing through. Something in between. James sits near the window while Diep showers. He watches the light outside fade slowly, thinking about how this journey will unfold, one place at a time, one episode at a time. He understands now that the connection between these moments won't come from distance, but from continuity, from staying present long enough for change to happen quietly. Diep joins him, hair still damp, wrapped in a sense of calm that surprises her. She sits beside him, and they talk, not about plans, but about how the day felt, what stood out, what didn't. The conversation drifts, pauses, resumes. There's no pressure to make it meaningful. Somehow, that makes it more so. Later, James pulls the map out again. This time, they look at it together for a little longer, not tracing routes, not measuring distances, just recognising that this piece of paper holds many possible tomorrows. James folds it carefully and places it back into the bag. Tonight, there's no question spoken out loud, no dramatic line to end the day. Just a shared understanding settling between them. The journey has begun in the smallest possible way, and that might be exactly why it will last. When the lights go out, the room fills with darkness and soft sounds again. Diep lies awake briefly, thinking about how this slow beginning feels like a promise, not of where they will go, but of how they will move forward, together, without rushing, letting each place shape the next. James closes his eyes, feeling the weight of the day dissolve. Somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, he realizes that this first destination was never about geography. It was about learning how to leave without escaping, how to move without losing themselves. And with that understanding resting quietly between them, the second night of the journey passes, steady, connected, and open to whatever comes next.
Xin chào mọi người. Trong tập này, Linda theo bà và cậu cháu ra nương mía. Dưới nắng sớm, bà vừa chặt mía vừa kể chuyện ngày xưa. Dậy chặt 3 hoặc 4 khúc cho đẹp để bán được giá. Đồng mía cao dần, 45 đồng trở thành hy vọng cho phiên chợ. Một cây mía đổ bất ngờ khiến cả nhóm kêu, rồi cười xòa vì kịp đỡ nhau. Chiều xuống, Linda buồn bã vì con rúi của mình đã biến mất. Nghi có kẻ trộm rình quanh nhà. CEO quang ghế đến lắng nghe và trấn an và tự sửa chiếc camera cũ trong kho, kéo dây lắp trước sân nhà để bảo vệ cô. Đêm đến, Linda nấu cơm nếp cẩm mời anh ở lại ăn. Hai người trò chuyện lòng ấm lại. Quang kể áp lực công ty, camera nháy sáng, bóng lạ thoáng qua, và không biết Linda có sống sót qua được đêm nay không. Mọi người nếu thấy video hay, hãy cho mình một like, một subscribe. Cảm ơn mọi người nhé.